Hi everyone, this is Mindy Eggen and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be walking you through the Hero Arts My Monthly Hero Kit, May 2021, and creating a few different underwater scenes. This month's kit is diving deep underwater, and we have this beautiful 6x8 stamp set including a large coral reef image, lots of great underwater fish, sentiments. It also has 12 coordinating frame cuts, an intensified black ink cube, contour ink cube. We also have turquoise sparkle embossing powder. And in the kit, you'll also get two 5.5 by 8.5 rose quartz cardstock, two 5.5 by 8.5 quartz pearlescent cardstock, and you'll receive three 5.5 by 8.5 white cardstock with lined texture. This kit values at $70 but only costs $34.99. Here's a closer look at the stamp set that you would be receiving in the kit. I apologize, mine is a little dirty because I've been playing with it a lot, but you can see that really large image. That's great for A2 size cards, 5x7s, or slimline cards. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the cardstock on hand to show you on camera, but I do have the turquoise sparkle embossing powder. So you want to make sure you shake that up. And I'm going to give you a closer look at this. I'm going to sprinkle it on some paper here and give you a closer look at this beautiful sparkle embossing powder. And I am going to put this sparkle embossing powder to work today on my card. The first thing that I'm going to do is create a quick background. I am using a piece of Doveweight cardstock that is cut to 4.25 by 5.5, and I have Pool Party Reactive ink here, and I'm going to ink blend this color on using a blending brush. I'm going to just do this in kind of one corner of my cardstock, just doing some circular motions, blending that on, and I'm going to have it fade off into the white of the cardstock. I don't want the whole thing. I just want a little bit of background color there for it. And it doesn't have to be a smooth blend of any means. We are going to be doing some heat embossing on top of this. So I just wanted to kind of have a foundation of color for my seawater background. Now this next piece that I'm ink blending, I'm going to be using Pool Party, Blue Raspberry, and Blue Hawaii Reactive ink. So I'm going to have it going from lightest to darkest. This piece I'm going to be using to stamp my image on. I'm going to use that large coral reef image. So I started out just doing about a third of the cardstock with that Pool Party, coming in with the Blue Raspberry. Again, the transition does not have to be perfect. The blends don't have to be perfect. And to do this, I am using just a mini foam ink blending tool. I like to use that when I need to cover an entire background. They give me a little bit better coverage. I like using the blending brushes when I just want a really soft transition. Then next, I'm going to take this piece and put it into my Misty stamping tool. Line it up onto the card front. It fits just perfect on this 4.25 by 5.5 inch piece of cardstock. And I'm going to ink up my image really well with the black intensified ink and stamp that down onto the cardstock. Once I'm happy with my stamping results, I'm going to take the coordinating die, line it up over the image and hold it in place with low tack tape, and then run this through my die cut machine. Now back to finishing my background. This was kind of an experimentation. I have a little ink cube here of some clear embossing ink, and I have my background where I just did that really light ink blending. So I am planning on putting my coral reef on the left hand side of the card. So I turned my cardstock and I'm dragging this ink cube across the cardstock towards where my coral reef is going to go. Then I'm just going to take that turquoise sparkle embossing powder and pour this over the top. I'm going to tap off any of that excess back onto my paper here, and I will put this back into my jar. I'm going to try and tilt my cardstock so you can see what it looks like on there. It's just adding a little bit of texture to my background. I was kind of really trying to play up that underwater look and adding just kind of stream marks, I guess, into my background. So once my heat tool is nice and hot, I'm going to go ahead and melt that embossing powder. And I decided I wanted to add a little bit more of this texture to the background. So once this panel has cooled down just a little bit, I'm taking that mini ink cube again and I'm going to drag that across my background again. This time I'm going all the way down to the bottom of the cardstock. I'm also going to bring in the sand embossing powder because that is absolutely gorgeous. It's a great combination with this turquoise sparkle embossing powder. So I'm going to take that sparkle embossing powder. I'm going to put just a little bit on. I know the bottom part of my card is going to be the bottom of the ocean, so I'm kind of saving that. So I'll sprinkle that embossing powder on, get rid of that excess, and then bring in my sand embossing powder. Now I noticed when I tapped this off, I must not have applied that embossing ink very well, but I'm going to go ahead and heat set this. Once this has cooled down, I'm going to bring that mini ink cube back in and just go over that area really, really well, just going right on top of where I heat embossed. Then I could come back in with that sand embossing powder and sprinkle some more over the top. Now, if you don't happen to have the sand embossing powder, that's okay. You don't have to add this to the bottom. You could do some ink blending with some light brown ink or just leave it as blue water in the background. So now that my background piece is done, I'm going to work on a sentiment really quick, and I'm going to use a sentiment off of the My Monthly Hero Kit. I line that up in my Misty tool, and I have a piece of pitch black cardstock that I'm prepping with my anti-static powder tool. I'm going to ink up the sentiment with the embossing ink and stamp that down onto the cardstock. And then I'm going to bring in white detail embossing powder, sprinkle that over my sentiment and tap off any of that excess. And once again, bring in my heat tool now that it's nice and hot and I can melt that embossing powder. To trim my sentiment down, you could either just eyeball it and use your paper trimmer, but I like to use the rectangle infinity die. So I picked a size that fit my sentiment. I'm holding that in place once again with some low tack tape, and I'll run that through the die cut machine. So now I have most of the components ready for my card. I am going to attach that large coral reef image with the Hero Arts Precision glue, mainly because I know my background is textured, so I wanted to make sure that this really stuck down. I also have a bunch of images here that I had stamped in a VersaFine ink and sprinkled with clear embossing powder, so that way I could do some embossed resist with the reactive inks. So they're very colorful. I went ahead and added foam squares to the back of those images, and I'm just removing the backing of that foam tape or the foam squares and adding them around my C bottom here. Once I have all the images in place, I'm also going to take some foam squares and add them to the back of the sentiment and pop that up as well. Now I do have a little bit of the coral reef that overhangs on the edge of my card, so I'll just take my scissors and trim that off so all of my edges are nice and flush and fit inside an envelope nicely. So there is one of the ways to use the My Monthly Hero Kit from May 2021 from Hero Arts. Here I'm just bringing it up to give you a closer look at that turquoise sparkle embossing powder in the background. Really loving it on top of that pool party ink that I ink blended on the background. Now that I have this one done, I'm going to go ahead and show you a few more ideas that I had come up with for the kit. Now this next card is actually a recreation of the card that I showed on Sneak Peek Day. So I'm using a piece of dove white cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I lined up that large coral reef image, and I'm prepping my cardstock with an anti-static powder tool because I'm going to be doing an embossed resist technique. Now what's really fun, and I love this new trick, is I am inking this up with the unicorn white pigment ink. I am going to be doing embossing with white embossing powder, and just by using that unicorn pigment ink just really helps fill in all of the gaps and just really gives me a great solid line on my image with using the white on white. So after I stamped that, I'm going to sprinkle on that white detail embossing powder, tap off the excess, and then after my heat tool is really nice and hot, I'm going to come in and melt the embossing powder. And I know it's really hard to see on screen, but once I start ink blending, this is really going to pop off the card. Before I get to ink blending my image, I wanted to ink blend my background first, so I gave it some time to dry. I was going to do some heat embossing on this, but I changed my mind a little later on in the video. So for right now, I have a piece of Adriatic cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And in one corner and working towards the middle, I'm going to ink blend on the navy shadow ink. So you can see I'm going on pretty heavy-handed. I really wanted to go for a dramatic background here for my sea bottom or my ocean bottom. I interchange those words throughout my entire video, but you know what I'm saying. So I'm just going in really heavy-handed with a mini ink foam blending tool. I decided to use that because I wanted to apply a lot of ink and I wanted it to be really, really dark back there. So I'm going up a little bit past half, and then I'm going to set this off on the side to dry for a little bit. I really wanted my coral reef to just be bright and colorful and vivid. So to do this, I am going to be using just some little finger dabbers and the reactive inks. I have a variety of colors here, including lemon drop, fruit punch, taffy, and blue Hawaii. And I'm just adding little bits of color. I love the color that is created when these colors blend together. So for instance, I get kind of a lighter orange when the lemon drop meets the fruit punch. And I also have that blue Hawaii when it meets the taffy ink just creates a beautiful purple. So I just ink blended all that color on, and then I'm buffing off any of the excess with just a towel or a paper towel, and then lining up the coordinating die and die cutting my image out. Now I love stamping tone on tone. So I am using a Misty corner to kind of pop up my cardstock a little bit in the Misty so that I can get this image onto the cardstock without it bumping the edges of my Misty tool. So I'm lining up that coral reef image. I also have my ink blended panel on here. This is going to be stamping tone on tone. So I wanted to make sure I have that kind of pushed up in the middle of the cardstock a little bit so that you can see it behind my ink blended panel. Once I have that lined up, I'll pick that image up with the door of the Misty. I'm going to pop my Misty corner back in here to make sure that my cardstock is in the exact placement that it was when I lined up my image. Then I'm going to ink up my image with the navy shadow ink and stamp that down onto the cardstock. Be sure to remove your Misty corner so that doesn't get in the way of your stamping. I also used a few other images from the kit, and my original card that I did during sneak peek day, I had waited enough time so that the ink blending was dried, and this was actually heat embossed in sparkle embossing powder, which turned out really great. But I was kind of impatient while doing this video, so I just went for tone on tone, and I'll show you a comparison here in just a little bit. Now, since I have my Misty tool out, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment. So I prepped my cardstock with that anti-static powder tool, inked up the sentiment in the embossing ink, and now this time for this card, I'm going to use the white detail embossing powder. On my previous card, I used silver, which looked really pretty, but I wanted this to pop out just a little bit more. And normally off screen too, after I have heat embossed my sentiments or images, I like to buff over them with a Swiffer cloth, and that just helps remove any of the excess anti-static powder that was on the cardstock and help bring that color back to life. So I lined the back of my image with foam tape, added that to the front of the card, and now I'm trimming off the excess. And actually one of those pieces that I trimmed off, I'm tucking underneath there. I kind of thought that helped complete the image a little bit. So now I'll bring in my sneak peek card that I had shown earlier. And this one, like I said, there's not a huge difference. You can see the sparkle embossing powder that I had used on the card on the left just kind of darkens that up a little bit and does have some sparkle to it. But for the most part, they're fairly the same. So now for my next card, I'm creating kind of a little window scene. I have a piece of dove white cardstock here that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I lined up a couple different sizes of circles from the Circle Infinity die cut those out of that panel, and here I have a couple extra pieces that I had ink blended. These were stamped in VersaFine ink, and then I sprinkled on clear embossing powder to seal in that black. So I have black lines there, and then once again had just done some ink blending with the reactive inks, and I'm going to tuck these in behind that window. I love how colorful these are, and I want to make sure I just have them kind of peeking through that window so that you could still see that Adriatic cardstock that is going to be in the background. Now, once I kind of have an idea where these are going to go or what's going to overhang, I'm just adding a little bit of tape runner behind those areas and attaching that to the cardstock. And you're going to notice I have a lot overhanging, and that is going to work out great if you want to create another card with those pieces, because I am just flipping this over and trimming that off. So you could get another card out of these, or even 2 more cards out of these if you do this style of card with those windows. Now I did take my front panel and line the back of it with some foam tape to give this a little bit of dimension. So I'll line that up over my background that I created. And now, of course, as I'm doing this, I'm thinking about where my sentiment's going to go, and I did not stamp it before I put my foam tape down. I don't know how many times I do this with cards, as I always forget about the sentiment, so I have to very carefully try and stamp this on. So I did load this into my Misty tool. I have a sentiment here that says "Stay Salty." I love this sentiment because I look at it as kind of sassy. I've seen some people questioning what it means, and I really do have quite a few friends that I would send this to, and it would make them giggle. So I really like this sentiment here. It's just kind of fun and playful. So I'm being really, really careful how I'm stamping this down because I do have dimension on this card. I am making sure that when I'm stamping it, I'm removing any excess ink off of my door of my Misty because I don't want that to transfer onto my card front. So now after I have my sentiment stamped, I can bring in a couple images that I ink blended off camera. I have that adorable little seahorse and this fun little, I think it's a clownfish. I'm not very good with my marine animals, but I had a couple different variations of the seahorse and I decided to go with the orange one. I thought that just stood out a little bit more than the blue one. I always make a ton of these when I'm working on my cards. That way, I do them in a variety of colors or some in gold embossing, some in black embossing. I just like having the variety to work with. So there's a look at my finished window scene card, and I do have a few other cards that I created off camera that I wanted to share with you. So this next card, I had heat embossed that coral reef in gold embossing powder and added that to a card front. And I have in the background there, that is the inverse bubble background, which is an add-on this month. So I have that stamped in the background. Another card that I had done was ink blended on white cardstock using just a variation of blues and die cutting that out and then adding it to some of the Nautical cardstock for a very tone on tone look. And if clean and simple is more of your style, here is a card I created where I just lined the fish up across the front of the card and stamped a sentiment down. Very clean and simple and very fun. So here's another quick look at all of the cards that I created for the My Monthly Hero Kit for May 2021. Now you can purchase the kit individually on its own, but if you become a subscriber, you'll never miss out on a kit because once these kits sell out, they are gone. So definitely head over to Hero Arts, check this out. I will have all of the links listed down below in the video description and over on my blog as well. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you again soon.